These ranged units are some of the best troops in both Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. The three of them have their own unique abilities and powers, and the wizard trio are so similar, but at the same time they are quite different from each other. So what happened to cause these three brothers to take on such different abilities? Here is the story of the three wizards. Before we continue with the rest of the video, I just wanted to take a quick second to thank this video's sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. Now, Star Trek Fleet Command is a free-to-play open-world MMO game which will be putting your skills and strategy skills to the test. The whole game is just an amazing experience that ventures into the well-known universe of Star Trek with stunning graphics and an immersive Star Trek story in the Kelvin timeline. You'll get the chance to play with millions of other players, create alliances, and defeat all of your enemies. You can build an epic fleet to secure and eventually dominate the entire galaxy. On this journey, you can explore strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations, venturing where no one has gone before while recruiting iconic officers like James T, Kirk, Spock, or Nero. You can use iconic Star Trek characters, ship, and tech, and my favorite ship, and the one that I'm currently using right now, is the ECS Fortunate. It's got a special ability where it can mine partial at expedited speeds, and so it comes in really handy a lot of the time. There's so many other options and special abilities that I'm sure you'll find your own favorite ships and characters in no time. But honestly though, my favorite part about the game is just how awesome the graphics are. With these cool graphics, it makes everything seem so much more like the real thing, and will make Star Trek fans feel right at home. If you want to try out the game for yourself, you can check out the link in the description below to download Star Trek Fleet Command. If you don't already have the Amazon App Store, make sure to download that first, as it's a great way to save money while getting your hands on tons of games. Also, not to mention that you'll have access to Amazon coins and save on tons of apps, games, and in-app items, and up to 20% off in-app purchases for Star Trek Fleet of Command. So what are you waiting for? Head over to the Amazon App Store, give the game a try for yourself, and let me know in the comments below who your favorite character or ship is. Anyways, let's go ahead and get back into today's video. Before there was a village chief, before there was a barb king or even an archer queen, and before most troops were even added into the game, there was an almighty being that had control over the Clash of Clans village. This so-called ruler of the village was a fair ruler, and the rest of the villagers respected him. He was sort of a sorcerer that carried around a staff and a spellbook with him at all times. In battles, he was extremely selfless and tended to provide his army with an aura that kept them alive for longer. Overall, he was an irreplaceable asset and also a well-respected ruler. The Warden, as he liked to call himself, was about to test the strengths of his new powers by performing the most difficult spell ever attempted. He was trying to transform an object into a living person, something that only the strongest magical being could successfully do. He decided to try it on a gem, because that was the most valuable object in the village, and if he was successful, this new being could be almost as powerful as him, if done correctly. So the Warden places the gem on the ground and then stands back and casts the spell. A beam of light shoots out of his staff and travels straight towards the gem. Once the light hits the gem, it reflects through the gem just like a crystal, and from the gem emerges three smaller beams of light. The first beam of light hits the fire at the nearby army camp, the second beam hits a hidden Tesla, and the third travels straight towards the spell factory and hits a bottle of freeze spell. All three objects begin to smoke and transform into human-looking forms. Then, once the transformations finished, three mini wardens were standing in front of him. One wore a red cloak and for some reason had a giant afro. Another had a light blue jacket and snow white hair. The last wore a dark blue jacket and looked sort of crazy. The power from the beam of light must have been weakened when it split into three, then forging into whatever object it hit, resulting in three versions of the Warden. The Warden was glad that his spell worked, but he also didn't know what to do with these new troops. The Warden was also curious if his powers transferred over to his kids, so he asked them, "So, do you guys have any sorts of powers?" Then each of the mini wardens shot out a spell out of their fingertips. The red one shot a fireball, the blue one shot a deadly snowball, and the dark blue one shot straight electricity. The Grand Warden was actually really impressed, and was thinking that him and his three new wizards are going to destroy so many bases together when they attack. Just like one big happy family. They all came in for a big group hug, but once they touched, the ground started shaking, and then it got more and more violent. Spell bottles started breaking, troops started screaming, and buildings started crumbling. The wizards and Warden immediately backed up, and then everything stopped shaking. They looked around and they could see their entire village in ruins. Everything has been destroyed. The Warden conspires that their combined power is too great, and if all their power is in one spot, it can cause great damage to the people and things around them. So he suggests that they should all split up. He then says that he will volunteer to leave since his power was the strongest, and it wouldn't be fair to have 3 people leave when one person could just leave. So the Grand Warden packs his stuff and goes on his way. Together, the 3 wizards weren't powerful enough to cause any more earthquakes, but they still had the power to cast spells and the like. One day, the Red Wizard was walking through the village and he came across an old book. He opened it up and he then realized what it was. It was the Grand Warden's spellbook. He took it back to show the Ice Wizard and the Electro Wizard what he found, but before he could tell them, he found a note from the Ice Wizard sitting on the floor. It said, "I am sorry, but I need to leave. The weather is too warm here and I don't know how much more of it I can take. I am going to the Clash Royale arena where I heard that they have a new snow arena called Frozen Peak. P.S. Electro Wizard is tagging along with me. I don't know why, but he's sort of crazy and I don't want to ask. P.P.S. I'll come back to visit sometime around Christmas for about a week." So the wizard put down the note and continued reading the Grand Warden's book. And over time he learned lots of things from it. He was able to brew new spells for the village and potions to upgrade other troops' attacks and health. He also later became one of the favorite troops in the village, and then one day, 4 years later, the Grand Warden came back, when word had finally gotten to him that the Ice Wizard and Electro Wizard had left. Now he was here to stay for good, and especially because there was a new defense that had just been created by the builder, called the Eagle Artillery, and the village was going to need all the help they could get taking that down. The new Super Wizard is likely the only super troop that actually looks more like a super villain rather than a superhero. But nonetheless, with the new Super Wizard's special attack that can hit over 10 buildings or troops all at once, the new Super Wizard now takes up 10 housing space, costs 25,000 Dark Elixir just to use it for a few days. So the big question that no one is asking inside of Clash of Clans is, where did this super powerful new Super Wizard come from? And how did a regular wizard develop all of these new superpowers that turned him into the new menacing looking Super Wizard? Find out all of that inside of today's story in the Super Wizard's origin story. The new Super Wizard's origin story all starts out with, yep, you guessed it, the regular wizard. So one day the wizard was working in his laboratory in the Clash of Clans village. He recently developed an interest in the Ice Golem's special properties that allowed him to basically drop a massive free spell that is double the size of a regular free spell. He didn't understand how the Ice Golem was able to do that, and so he conducted a bunch of research and tests on the Ice Golem to try and figure it out. Now the wizard could have saved himself a ton of time by watching the Ice Golem's origin story, which I have on my channel that you guys should definitely check out for yourselves, but nonetheless, he ended up figuring it out on his own. And so he wanted to try and recreate a new super powerful free spell to create a more powerful version of the one that the village already had, and so one that the village could use on a frequent basis without having the Ice Golem there. And so the wizard started brewing up a spell inside of a cauldron. And as the wizard was brewing the spell, he realized that he didn't have enough of some ingredient, and so he quickly went to go fetch it. And so the wizard ran off to grab the last ingredient. But when the wizard got back, he saw that the lava hound had fallen into the cauldron somehow. He didn't know how, but he knew that he had to do something to save him. And so the wizard casted a quick spell that lifted the lava hound out of the potion. The wizard came back at the perfect time, and he ended up saving the lava hound's life by a few seconds. But the lava hound did change a little bit even though he was saved, where the ice spell ended up having a bit of a funny effect on the lava hound, which ended up turning him into a bright white and blue looking lava hound. Instead, it was more like a ice hound. Which, by the way, you can find the entire story of everything that happened to the lava hound and how he got into that cauldron in the first place, all inside of the Ice Hound's origin story, which I'll have linked in the description below or by clicking the I in the top right. But anyway, this story isn't about the Ice Hound, it's all about the wizard. And so after the wizard saved the lava hound and after the new Ice Hound had flown away, the wizard was teleported into an unknown magical area without any notice. He was just in his laboratory in 1 second and then poof, he was gone. And so where the wizard ended up teleporting was unknown, and standing in front of him was the Leprechus god, the creator of the Clash universe. So the Leprechus god spoke to the wizard and told him that after witnessing what he just did to save that lava hound, he wanted to reward him. Lately, the Leprechus god has been rewarding troops around the village by blessing them with new superpowers for their good deeds that they've done. And so now that the wizard proved himself worthy, it was now his turn to be rewarded. And so the wizard was blessed with a new superpower that allowed him to attack multiple buildings all at once, and it also boosted his overall power in terms of health and damage. But best of all, the wizard was going to be getting a brand new wardrobe upgrade, courtesy of the Leprechauns god. Now the wizard already loved fashion a ton, as you can tell throughout some of the Clash commercials, but now that he was getting a new outfit, he was beyond excited, and honestly he was more excited about this rather than the buffs that he just got. And so while the Leprechauns god went to go fetch the brand new wardrobe for the wizard was stuck waiting alone inside of the empty room. The wizard noticed that on a table nearby there was a potion there. The wizard had never seen this type of potion before, considering he was usually the one that made them all in the Clash village, and so he was really intrigued by it. And he figured that since it was the Leprechauns god's spell, he figured that it must be super powerful or do something really unique. And so while the god was gone, the wizard snatched the potion and was planning on taking it back to the Clash village with him. Now when the Leprechauns god got back, he didn't notice that the spell was missing, and so he gave the wizard his brand new wardrobe, and then he casted the spell that transported him back to the Clash of Clans village. And only a while later did the Leprechauns god realize that the wizard had stolen his invisibility spell from him. It was a spell that he had been working on for quite some time, and he was going to give it to the Clash of Clans village in a little bit anyways. And so he wasn't too mad that the potion was gone, and it's not like it was going to be super overpowered inside of the Clash village. And so since he didn't really care too much about the potion, he decided not to take the wizard's powers away, and instead he decided to just give him a punishment. And also considering that the Leprechauns god didn't want to go through all of the work of taking back the super wizard's powers or anything like that. He had just had a long week and he really just wanted a break, and he had been working very hard all year, and so he decided to just let it go. And so instead of removing the wizard's superpowers, he just ended up punishing him by making his powers temporary, and made it so that every time he wanted to use them, he would have to pay a hefty amount of Dark Elixir just to activate it each time. And that there seems like payment enough for what the wizard had stolen from the Leprechauns gods. And so when the wizard ended up getting back to the Clash of Clans village, he had this brand new spell that he really wanted to test out. And so inside of the next battle, he ended up throwing the potion on the ground, and all of a sudden he was able to see, or rather he was not able to see himself anymore. He realized that the new spell was some sort of invisibility spell that anytime you walked into the area of the potion, you would end up disappearing yourself. And so he was really curious about this, and so in the next battle he brought it out with him. But when he threw it on the ground, not only did he disappear, but all of the buildings that he was trying to attack disappeared as well. It was too bad because he was thinking that if he could be invisible for the entire battle, it would be super OP. But considering that it turned absolutely everything that it touched completely invisible, it wasn't going to be as powerful as he had originally thought. And he was starting to think that maybe this punishment wasn't worth this invisibility spell. It wasn't nearly as OP as he thought, and it wasn't worth risking his life for. But nonetheless, the deed had been done. He had been punished by the Leprechauns god, and he had the invisibility spell, and so he was going to try and make it worth his while. And so he brought it to the Clash of Clans village, who was absolutely amazed at this brand new spell that he had created, and the fact that it could turn things invisible. Now, it wasn't super overpowered, but the king was just excited to experiment with a new spell, and so he was still very happy with the wizard. And with that, he ended up upgrading the wizard to the Super Troop Barracks, where he got to be put alongside all of the other super troops. The wizard was now in super high company, and he felt like one of the bosses in the whole base. And although his powers were only temporary, he was still a super cool troop that all of the troops looked up to, as he did have that super status. And anyways, that there is the story of how the wizard was turned into the new super wizard inside of Clash of Clans. The newest addition to the Clash Royale card collection is the new powerful male archer known as the Magic Archer. His description is stated as follows: not quite a wizard nor an archer, he shoots a magic arrow that passes through and damages all enemies in its path. It's not a trick, it's magic. So based off of this, here is the Magic Archer's origin story and how he was created and how he made it to the Clash Royale arena. One day, back in the Clash of Clans village, a young wizard named Mark was born. However, unlike the rest of the wizards in the village, this wizard was different from the others. It wasn't obvious to everyone yet, but they were soon to find out just what set him apart. But despite all of that, he grew up and was raised just like any other wizard. But then once all of the young wizards began to start training for battle, Mark felt a bit out of place. It all started that morning when Mark was walking over to the barracks to begin his training. And on the way there, he noticed two archers playing some shooting game where they were calling their shots and then hitting them, even though they should have been impossible. Mark couldn't believe what he was seeing and thought that this was the coolest thing that he'd ever seen in his life. And as he kept walking, he couldn't stop thinking about how on earth they were hitting those shots. But alas, once he got to the barracks, he stopped to listen to what his instructor had to say. The instructor began telling them that the secret to wizardry magic is to focus on one thing and only one thing, and then channel that energy through your fingertips. He told them to start focusing on an element such as fire, ice, or electricity, as those are the easiest to summon, and no wizard had successfully summoned any other elements other than fire, ice, and electricity before. So most wizards ended up casting fireballs, and then a few of them shot out ice shards out of their fingertips, and then a few of the really crazy ones had electricity flying out of their fingers. Mark tried really hard but was just completely unable to summon any of the three elements. He tried over and over again, but still nothing happened. The instructor came over to him and kept trying to teach him to summon something, but after trying for a few hours, the instructor finally gave up and told Mark that he was a lost cause. Then he and the other wizards got up and left. Mark was extremely upset and mad at the instructor, so he went down to the beach to cool off. And as he was sitting there, the master builder, who was just about to head back to his island since he was done gearing up an archer tower, saw him sitting by himself and went over to him. He could see that the young wizard was upset and he politely asked what was the matter. Mark then explained that he was the worst wizard ever and couldn't do any magic at all. Then after a short pause, through tears, he said, "I wish I could have just been born an archer." Then the master builder felt awful for the young wizard and told him to wait where he was. The young wizard didn't think much of it, but decided to wait anyways since he had nothing else to do. Then a bit later that night, the master builder returned with something in his hand. He held a glowing turquoise bow that just radiated energy. The master builder handed him the bow and his eyes lit up. And when I say they lit up, I literally mean that they began to glow. Mark was super pumped to be given a bow, but he noticed that it didn't have any arrows to shoot. So he asked the master builder what he was going to shoot without any arrows. To this, the master builder looked at him and said, "Well, you're a wizard, aren't you? So use your magic." Then the master builder gathered his hammer and took his little towboat back to the village. And even though Mark had just spent the whole day not able to summon any magic at all, he decided to give it one last shot. So he went over to the trees where he could focus better, and then he started focusing extremely hard on what he wanted most. And to his surprise, a small ball of energy formed in his hand. Then without hesitating, he took that ball of energy and turned it into an arrow. He notched the arrow and then fired a random shot. The arrow, made out of pure energy, went straight through everything it hit, and it never stopped or slowed down. It went all the way around the world until it came full circle and came right back to him. He willed the arrow to stop, and then he looked down at his hands, not believing what he just did. Mark had become the first magical archer. The next day at training, Mark showed off his new powers in front of the other wizards and his instructor. Everyone was super impressed, and then the instructor came over to Mark and announced, "See, I knew you could do it. I taught you very well." Then he began bragging to everyone else that he was the one who taught him how to do that. But Mark didn't want to have any part of that crap, so he decided it would be best for him to leave. So he went to the only other place where his kind could go, to the Clash Royale arena. One of everyone's favorite troops in Clash of Clans and Clash Royale is a powerful and humorous character who just so happens to also be able to incinerate troops with his fireballs. So although he is a fan favorite with his magic tricks, he is also someone that his enemies fear deeply. So this formidable troop is truly a legend in the Clash world. But the big question right now is, who the heck is this new wizard who has an obsession with partying all the time? Find out in my story on the Party Wizard's origin story. So, a long time ago, the wizard had multiple brothers, many of whom went on to do amazing things, such as the Ice Wizard who learned to control ice and snow, and the Electro Wizard who learned to harness the power of electricity, and himself, of course, who could summon massive fireballs. But the one brother that no one ever talks about is his brother named Chad. No one has ever heard of Chad until now, but for good reason, and that's because he's never been around and has an unhealthy obsession with partying. As the youngest wizard in the family, he felt that he could never live up to his family's expectations of him, especially when his older brothers were out there controlling fire, ice, and electricity. And so because of this, he decided to at least enjoy himself all the time by partying. His parents even tried to help him become more powerful like his brothers by helping teach him powerful spells. At one point, they even wrote down on a piece of paper one of the most powerful fireball spells ever. But Chad just crumpled up the paper and shoved it into his pocket like he didn't care. He ended up falling so much in love with dancing and listening to music, so much that in fact he wanted to move away to a place that had parties way more often than the Clash of Clans village. And so just like the builder did a while back, Chad decided to leave the Clash of Clans village and go to join the real world. where there was always a party happening somewhere. He ended up staying in the real world for a really long time, and he had no intentions at all of coming back to the Clash of Clans village. Well, at least not until he found out that Clash of Clans was actually throwing their own huge party for their 6-year anniversary. When he heard that big news, he thought to himself that this could be one of the parties of the year, and there was no way that he could miss it. And so the party wizard began making his way back to the Clash of Clans village. But Chad had been away from the village for so long that he forgot exactly how to get back home. And so for a long time he wandered around until finally many days later he got lucky and found the Clash of Clans village by chance. But when he finally did get back, it was too late. The 6-year anniversary party was over and he had missed the biggest party of the year. Chad was pretty upset by this and was getting ready to go back to the real world to make up for all the partying he missed, but before he could leave, his brother the wizard ran up behind him and yelled stop. Chad turned to look at him and then the wizard said to Chad, "You look exhausted, you've been gone for so long. Just come stay one night with me and then you can leave in the morning." So Chad decided to take him up on it. He stayed the night with the wizard inside of his wizard tower. But when the wizard finally woke up, he woke up to screaming and yelling and the sounds of cannonballs flying through the air. Apparently the village was being attacked. The wizard poked his head out of the small door and saw that there were barbarians running everywhere, giants smashing buildings, and hog riders singing terribly.
Now you got me!
The wizard just sat back and watched from the tower as all the fighting went down. He then watched his brother and the other wizard towers shoot at all the attacking troops and watched them take out all of the enemies. Then when the battle was finally done, Chad watched as the rest of the village cheered and congratulated the wizards on their work. The wizards were basically like heroes here. And when they were finally done celebrating, Chad went over to his brother and asked him to teach him how to defend the village just like he did. He wanted to be a hero and be celebrated just as much as them. His brother looked at him and told him that if he was going to do that, then he would need him to give up his partying for good. And Chad agreed to do that. He thought it was finally time to do something more productive and helpful, and so he locked his party outfit away in a closet and locked it away. And then after that, his brother began showing him the ropes of running his own wizard tower. And Chad did an amazing job. It was almost like he was born to do this. He was just as good as the rest of the wizard towers and was doing extremely well, and for the whole time he didn't even think about partying once. But then, a little less than a year later, the village announced that they were going to be celebrating their 7-year anniversary with a huge party. And at first, Chad tried to resist the urge of going back to this party. But he was only holding on by a thread, because this was a similar party to the exact party that he missed a year ago. So he really wanted to go to this one, but alas, he refused to go. But since he was only holding on by a thread, once his magic rabbit opened up his locked cabinet with his party outfit, he just lost it and went back to his old ways. He went full out party mode at the 7-year anniversary, but at least on the bright side, he still did care about the village. So he wanted to keep defending it even though he still liked partying. But the village chief wouldn't let him. He said that with his partying habit, he couldn't trust him to repeatedly show up for his job. For example, what if he was too busy partying one night and didn't wake up in time the next day while the village was being attacked? So Chad was unable to defend the village anymore, but there was nothing stopping him from attacking. So he joined the Clash army, and while he was waiting to attack by the army camp, he reached into his pocket and found some scrunched up piece of paper. He looked at it and noticed that it was some super powerful spell that his parents had written down for him a long time ago. And so the next battle, he ended up testing that spell out, and it did way more damage than his regular fireball. With this new fireball, he found a special niche inside of the army and found that he was even more powerful than the wizard himself, although he did have less health only because his outfit didn't provide as much protection as the other wizards. And so for the next month, the party wizard stayed in the Clash of Clans village and partied hard while also helping them attack on offense. But alas, only time will see if this will be the last that we see of the party wizard. And that there is the story of the party wizard's backstory.